This is a review of the Cube Nenuphar loudspeaker. It is a breakthrough product, in my opinion. I think it's as important a breakthrough as Peter Walker's quad speaker was 40 years ago. Why is that? Well, I've heard single drivers before. They have almost perfect phase coherence. What they don't have is bass. When I first heard the Cube Nenuphar at the Munich high-end show, the Hi-Fi Deluxe show, I couldn't believe it. I thought, my goodness gracious, I've never heard bass like that out of any single driver speaker before. Many designers will use a subwoofer with single drivers, or you can tell they just don't have a lot of bass. Most of them, 8-inch models that I've heard, 3 dB down point is about 40 hertz. So there's a lot of bass information beneath 40 hertz. This driver has it. This is the Cube Audio F10 Neo driver in the Cube Audio enclosure. These speakers totally disappear in your listening room. All you hear is sound field. Your imaging is perfect. You don't have multiple drivers to screw up phase response. You're getting a perfect wave launch of the transient response, of the transient. That is, you have to hear it to believe it. This is perhaps the most perfect speaker available today. It is very detailed, so keep that caveat in mind. What you get with this loudspeaker is total magic, truth to the recording. We're going to play a Michel Joannès track in a little bit, and you'll hear it for yourself. So when I heard that Cube, I instantly knew that that was going to be a Gold Show winner in Munich that year. And in 2018, near the end of the year, we received a pair for audition here at AVShowrooms, and it was product of the year for AVShowrooms. It is an extraordinary loudspeaker for numerous reasons. First of all, of course, perfect phase coherency. It's easy to drive. It's 92 dB efficient, and a 6 ohm nominal load. You can drive it with a 3-watt amplifier. They don't recommend any more power over 40. So you have the world is your oyster when it comes to what you can use with a speaker. I drove it with an Auris Audio 6550 integrated. I drove it with the Gakuans, which are sitting off to my left. We're currently using the Aries Surat Genus integrated amplifier. I had the Avic U300 on the Cube. Every amplifier I have on the Cube, the sound is completely different, because the Cube is such a great reviewing tool. You hear everything in the recording or upstream in your system. So Cube Audio, they were founded just a little over 5 years ago. Team is based in Poland. The speaker is, as you can see, very attractive. I think it looks very good in black with the color of the cone. It's available in different finishes. You'll see I have it placed relatively close to the black wall. That does help with the bass reinforcement. I've heard them out in the room at shows, and I think that they do perform better if you have them back up a little bit against the wall like we have here. Another extraordinary achievement that the speakers do is you don't have to have them loud. You don't have to have them at ear-shattering levels. When I had the MBLs, I turned those up, and some mornings my ears would be ringing for the night before, and that's not good. These speakers, you turn them down, and you still hear the same amount of detail. They still have the same amount of life. That is very important if you're listening to the amount of music that I listen to daily, which is 4 to 6 hours a day, I don't have to worry about damaging my hearing. Something that we should think about at high-end audio. I've been in so many show exhibits where it's just too loud. And you're all caught up in the show and you know that you shouldn't be listening at that level. Well, these speakers solve that. You get the full impact of your music without having to damage your ears. So that's another extraordinary achievement that these speakers do. The imaging, because of the phase coherency, it's only one driver. There is no crossover. I looked inside. Wires go right down to the binding post, right off the driver. Easy to drive, beautiful to look at. They sound magnificent. Before we have our listening session, I've invited John Verhalen to talk about the design of the speaker. He technically knows everything about single driver speakers. So let's have a chat with John. Okay, here we go. I've talked about how I was introduced to Cube Audio at the Hi-Fi Deluxe show in Munich. Now I'd like to introduce you to John Verhalen from Refined Audio. We're going to talk about the technology. Who better to talk about it than a man who's been working with single drivers for how many years?
Single drivers, 20 years now.
20 years. 20 years. So what got you involved in single drivers in the first place?
A long time ago, back in the late 90s, the single-ended craze started to come about. And I was very interested in it. I became friends with a number of people who designed and built single-ended triodes. As a result, I needed a high-efficiency system, and I was drawn to the Louders. I had heard about them. At that time, I tried to become the distributor for Lowther, but Tony Glynn owned Lowther America. And Tony had the business, but his health began to go, and I purchased the business from him. So I became Lowther America. And I stayed that way until probably 4 or 5 years ago, when it was decided it would be better if I did not represent Lowther anymore.
Well, you've since and hence picked up the Cube. And the Cube, as I mentioned in the beginning of the clip, it's changed the way I look at wide-band speakers. Because I too heard the Lowthers 20 years ago. Tony sent a pair to someone in the Northeast. They came to the Philadelphia Triode Show. They had a lamb horn enclosure. I was intrigued by the speakers. But they had a little bit of a cuppy sound to them back in the day. And this speaker does not. Why don't we talk about the driver?
All right. This is actually a driver from the Nenuphar. And what we have on the back is neodymium magnets. Now, neodymium, if you look at this, neodymium is not very good when you have a single large magnet. So you have to break it up into lots of little magnets in order to get the proper force. And as you can imagine, with magnets, north and north try to reject. So this whole thing really wants to explode out from underneath you.
Oh, I never thought of that, yeah.
And there's a heavy ring surrounding all of the magnets to keep them in place. And then you have the north and the south pole. And this is the plate that carries all the magnet force to the center. And then you would have the pole piece, which is the center piece here. And in this particular driver, there is 2.4 Tesla of magnetic strength.
That's incredible. Incredible.
That's almost saturation for a magnetic field. Mm-hmm. The faceplate on the magnet is very thick, and compared to the thickness of the voice coil, the height of the voice coil, you can see that the plate is much thicker. Here we can compare it directly.
Oh, I see.
And what this means is that the voice coil is moving in a perfectly linear portion of the magnetic gap. And that means it's extraordinarily linear. A normal magnet, the voice coil is longer than the faceplate, and there's always some non-linearity associated with it moving in and out of that magnetic field. We never have that with a Cube Audio. This is an underhung voice coil, and in terms of the linear response, very important. Linear response means that you have better dynamics and less distortion.
Now, the speaker goes into a cabinet. The cabinet is actually hollow. It opens down to the floor. So when you see here the front shot of the cabinet, it's tilted back. That's open all the way up to the top. Explain the reasoning behind the cabinet.
Okay, the cabinet itself is what is referred to as a tapered quarter wave transmission line.
Okay.
It's a form of a transmission line, and the idea is that a portion goes in the back and narrows down, and then in the front it continues down to the floor and opens up. So it's almost like a horn or almost like a transmission. It has some of the combination there. And there's a little bit of a resonance push, so that when you take and push the cone back, part of the wave goes back and then forward, and then is reinforced by the cone and then goes down to the bottom, so that you have got a magnified bass response.
Yeah.
And that aligns with where a normal speaker would put a baffle step correction in. Anybody who has designed a driver or a speaker system knows that the baffle width defines your low end response, and then you get a drop off of about 6 dB, and that drop off requires that you put a network into the speaker to compensate for that. This tapered quarter wave avoids that compensation. So we're one of the very few speakers that there's nothing but wire between the driver and the amplifier, wire and binding post, and that makes the speaker so pure.
And it also makes the speaker affordable. Many single driver speakers that are on the market today are priced at 3 to 5 times the price of the Cube Audio for approaching levels of performance of the Cube. Now, as you're aware, I'm a big fan of the Cube. I think that the speaker, it's a revolutionary speaker, and as I mentioned in the beginning, I think it's equal to the work of Peter Walker at Quad back 40, 50 years ago. I think it is that magnitude of an invention.
Okay, and we can continue talking about the inventions that have gone into this.
Yes.
Or reinventions, because when we look at the speaker cone itself is paper, and the paper is obviously self-dampening. The problem with paper, we found out with Lowther, is it's hydroscopic, meaning that it absorbs moisture. So Lowthers sound best on rainy days. That's all there is to it. And you don't want to have a speaker that you can only listen to on rainy days. And when you're in the dry of winter and the speaker sounds harsh, it's because that cone is now brittle and doesn't absorb anymore. Cube Audio put a wonderful coating on this that prevents it from being hydroscopic. It's waterproof. So I took and I tried to scratch off an area in the back just to show you what the coating looks like. So you have the paper, which has dampening associated with it, and then this coating which stiffens the paper, but also keeps it non-hydroscopic. So it keeps the consistency day in, day out for listening experience.
Well, that's a very interesting invention that the designer has come up with. I was not aware of the fact of the changes in the humidity to a pure paper cone speaker until now.
And then we take a look at the cone and we see that we have the main cone, we have the mid-range whizzer.
Mm-hmm.
This middle part is just a separate looks like a whizzer, but it's a dampener. That dampener damps any resonance between the main cone and the whizzer. That resonance was the cause of the louder shout. So that's why we have no louder shout on this particular cone, is because we have that secondary whizzer in there acting as a dampener. And then we have another inner whizzer, which is just for the highs and the high dispersion. So that, again, you know, this is the voice coil, and it's connected, and you'll notice that the voice coil is connected to what would produce the bass, the mid-range, and the highs. Now you have total phase coherence, because they can't be separated, and you have total time alignment, because there is no misalignment between the driver, front, and rear. And even if you have a standard cone driver with a mid-range and a woofer and a tweeter, the distance that you listen to it affects whether it's time aligned or not. This, you can sit right on top of the driver and it'll be perfectly time aligned, and you can sit back 20 feet and it'll be perfectly time aligned and coherent. So it's a wonderful driver in that respect, and in terms of near field listening, it is unbeatable. Because
it is unbeatable for near field. I agree.
So then we take, and the other thing, and you cannot see it because I broke it off when I disassembled it, but this has a phenolic suspension. It's a phenolic suspension. And what that means is there is a term of art in speaker design called RMS. And this is the resistance of the suspension. So that on a normal suspension, when you have a foam or something that's damped, it actually has resistance, so that it resists the movement forward, resists the movement backward. This is more of a spring. It doesn't really resist the movement. It's a spring as opposed to being a rubbing point. It doesn't create friction. So the friction is what kills your low response. At the very, very low listening levels, a normal speaker will sound more and more dead.
Yep.
When you listen to these at low level, they do not sound dead. They sound almost the same as they do at large listening levels. Now, what that means is your what we call the downward dynamic range, the ability to respond to a very, very small signal, exists very well in the Cube audio, but not very well in a standard driver. And so that's, you know, a very important part of the design. The surround, and I've cut the surround on this, is foam, and the advantage of that is that the movement back and forth, if you had rubber or leather or some other material, it creates a wave and then it reflects back into the cone. This has a very small amount of mass to it, and therefore a very small momentum to get energy back into the cone and reflect. So again, this is a design that is really set up to enhance the performance of the driver. The edge around the side you'll see is folded, and those of you who would be engineers will know that when you fold something back, it stiffens it.
Yeah.
It creates what we would call a flange. And then on the cone, there's a series of joints on the cones. On a louder, there's a single joint, so it's one wrap, but the fact is that when you have one single joint, there is a propensity for it to have greater mass and therefore warp the cone as it's accelerating and deaccelerating. So by distributing that out, we distribute out the ability of the cone to resist that, and it's again much more coherent than a standard driver.
Well, the proof is in the listening, and that's what we're going to do next, viewers.
jour traversé, l'idée reçue. En s'éloignant petit à petit de notre enfance, les corps vieillissent, les cœurs se ferment, que l'on n'échappera jamais à la déchéance, que l'on n'y peut rien, on part battu. Il n'y a pas d'autre alternative, pas d'autre issue. Et quand nous jetons tête baissée sous son par-dessus, le temps passé n'est pas passé. Inaperçu. On s'est aimé, cœurs enlacés et dessous, dessus. Commencer tout, on commençait. Il ne l'a su. On s'est regardé autrement et on a eu peur. Que l'ombre grandisse, se fait, et que la peau puisse perdre un jour de sa douceur. Mais tout ça vaut rien, tout ça n'est plus. Et si l'on meurt, c'est à cause de l'idée reçue. Quand je tombe sur le feu sacré, son par-dessus, le temps passé n'est pas
listening session. Michel Jones, he appeared right here with us. The piano, electric piano, it was spookily realistic. That's what these speakers do. They bring your music to life, right in your room. I find that I'm captivated with all the recordings I know well, new music. It's just, I'm discovering it. Of course, it's new, but I'm hearing it properly. I'm hearing it the way it was recorded. These speakers are so revealing. You will hear things in your favorite recordings you've never heard before. But they don't shave your ears off. That's the magic. That is the total magic. Now, our associated equipment in the system for the review, the Kronos Pro turntable, the Black Beauty arm. We're back and forth between the Urushi Bordeaux and the Ikeda 9G SS. And again, we've had 5 different amplifiers on the cubes. We've had the Audio Note Gakuans. We've had the Ars Audio 6550 integrated. We've had a Pioneer A27, which is a vintage solid state piece known for its detail and clarity. We've had the AVShowrooms U300, which is a detailed tour de force. So you take a detailed switching amplifier like the AVShowrooms on a highly detailed speaker, you would think, oh, this is not going to work. It's spectacular. You hear everything in your recording. It's non-fatiguing. This is what I find so extraordinary with the loudspeaker, is the amount of detail retrieval that you get without it tearing your ears off. How many times have you listened to your friend's system or a system at a show and it's bright and you leave the room? This gives you the detail, but without the brightness. It's another unbelievable achievement that this loudspeaker does. We listen at the beginning of every listening session to a half an hour of Klaus Schulze. We have an extensive Klaus Schulze collection. We like it because it gets you in the mood. It relaxes you. It's a nice soft ambient. And this speaker, it has the layers of so many different textures that Klaus has created throughout your listening room. I mean, it's like your room's just disappeared. We start every listening session, usually, with that. And that just is the beginning of what ends up to be every night the most spectacular listening sessions I've had as an audiophile in my whole life. And that's saying something. The speaker is, of course, visually, it's beautiful. It's not that big. One person can pick one unit up. It's super easy to drive. So many amplifier choices. It's just spookily realistic. I don't know of anything better. That's the word for this speaker. It's realism. It's sonic realism. I've never heard anything like it. Now, as I said with John, I heard the lamb horn with the Lowthers back in the day. And I was intrigued. And as I mentioned with John, problem I had at Cuppy Sound, these don't have it. Now the speakers do like to be back up against the wall to help a little bit with the bass reinforcement, but they give you everything. No, I wouldn't put them in a large ballroom. That's better for a multi-driver speaker in a much larger box. But these are perfect for any mid-size or smaller listening room like all of us, most of us have. A review like this, it's easy to do because I can't find any fault. I mean, maybe I would like to hear a little bit more 20 hertz notes, but not necessary. Not with 3 dB down at 30 hertz. You're getting great bass response. This speaker is the most transparent, lifelike speaker I've ever heard. I encourage you to go out and audition a pair, or simply buy a pair. You will be amazed. Peter Bruninger, reporting for AV Showrooms, on the Cube Nenuphar loudspeaker from Poland.